You're listening to the Brown Sign Project podcast.
Introducing Meridian Experience from Retail Integration, the leading multi-channel ticketing, retail and membership system for visitor attractions. Working with visitor attractions for over 25 years, Retail Integration have developed the ultimate solution that enables some of Ireland's leading visitor attractions manage every aspect of their business, from ticketing and admissions to merchandising, food and loyalty programs in one single system. Customer experience is at the heart of what we do. Contact us today and let Retail Integration help you to exceed visitor expectations. We listen, we develop, we deliver.
Oh, hello, and welcome to the Brown Sign Project, the podcast that talks to some of the most captivating and influential voices in the tourism and attractions industry. I'm Carlton Gadjadar.
And I'm Carly Strawn. In this episode, we're super excited to bring you a conversation with one of my favourite people, the founder of ReWork Consulting, Sarah Bagg.
We talk about Sarah's diverse and interesting career path and find out how working in a bar can actually be a hidden opportunity for quick advancement. Sarah gives us helpful hints for both job seekers and employers when it comes to recruiting.
And of course, we're going to hear Sarah's top tips for getting into and getting on in the tourism industry. We're also going to hear about how our vision of consulting will look in the future. Thanks, as always, must go to our series sponsors Staff Savvy and Retail Integration. Now it's time for our chat.
Okay, today we are joined by a lovely lady called Sarah Bagg. She is a founder of ReWork Consulting. So welcome, Sarah. How are you today?
I'm very well, thank you. Suffering a little bit from recovering from a virus, but all good.
Oh, I'm so sorry to hear that. But hopefully you'll get better soon. If you can just kind of give us a quick insight about you, what you do, and a little about yourself.
So ReWork Consulting was launched last year. I help technology companies and attractions grow their businesses through improving the technology partnerships that they have with each other. And then prior to ReWork launching, I worked for a ticketing technology company here in the UK for about 9 years, and I kind of decided that I would bring my attractions and leisure hospitality operators experience together with that experience that I have from being a technology provider to help and give something back to the attraction sector. That's a very short synopsis of my career.
That's really, really good. You talk about technology. Are you still in ticketing, or do you do other stuff?
So I help attractions find ticketing solutions and partners. But like Carly will very much know, ticketing isn't just ticketing. It's membership, access control, fundraising, everything that goes with it, CRM, etc. My business kind of took a bit of a different direction in autumn last year. So I've also helped some technology companies with their sales and marketing and sales conversion, because obviously that's what I was doing at TOR Systems. So I'm best placed, obviously, to advise in that particular area of their businesses. So I've kind of got two strands to my business now.
So you said, you sort of are kind of in a technology space nowadays.
Mm-hmm.
What did you do at school, and did it have anything to do with technology? Did you think that was where you were going to end up? What sort of brought you to that?
Not at all. And ironically, I was the kid at school, like, bearing in mind I'm 45. So this is like, would probably seem a bit archaic to any young person that's listening. But I was in the era of, you had like IT lessons where they taught you how to turn the computer on and off, in which order, which seems completely madness now. And I didn't even have a computer at home. My parents didn't have a computer. When I was at university, I did art and design, and there was no computer aided design at all on my course. The only time I came to use a computer was to do my dissertation in my last year, and I borrowed my friend's laptop. So it's quite ironic now that I've fallen into the technology world as such. But I think it's a long story, and I think that you through your career you take steps, and one door opens another door, and before you know it, you're in in a particular field where you never had any idea that you were going to get there. So
yeah, I think, like you say, that for sort of the generations after us, it sort of might seem a bit strange that there was a time when, you know, you would write essays and they were not on a laptop, or you would, you know, how did you know what your word count was, and all this kind of stuff that goes in people's minds. But I recently, not that recently, a couple of years ago, when we moved house, my parents did the thing that all parents do, where they bring the stuff that you've left in their loft and dump it at your door. Say, here you go, you can have all this now. And in there, I found a certificate from my school that said Carly had used the network and had been able to use the internet.
Hurrah, big tick.
I can't imagine now that many kids get a certificate that says, today they learned to use the internet.
Yeah.
Well done,
yeah.
Carly.
So there was obviously no Google search engine when I was at uni. If you went to try and use the internet, it was like scrolling through pages and pages and pages of websites before you could actually find anything useful. So yeah, not very much good for doing any research for your dissertation, that's for certain.
Yeah, I remember them times as well. I'm not going to show my age, but yes, I remember that as well. No, brilliant. Thank you very much for that. So kind of my question I want to ask you is kind of, how did you get started in your career? Because I know you mentioned in school you got a little bit of IT stuff and didn't have your own computer, but now you're kind of in full force IT stuff. So how did it start?
It's really weird because I don't think, like, when people say, how did your career start? I don't really remember where there's a defining moment of like, oh, I decided to get into this career. Like I've worked in leisure, hospitality and tourism since I was 14, 15. And from like, I worked in Green Leisure Park, big shout out to Somerset. Still going, really successful caravan and leisure park when I was like 17. And
what job did you do? What was your job?
My God, like I did work in the cafe, and the bloke that ran it like used to leave me in charge. I absolutely have no idea what he was doing, but yeah, he used to leave me in charge for whole half day shifts, crashing up, and I was cooking, I was cleaning, I was doing everything. And I still think like hospitality is the best industry for like learning so many skills. So I guess what Carlton was asking was like the start of the career. And I think I went to university for 3 years and studied something completely different to this. So I studied textile design and illustration. And that was my passion at school. I loved art. So I followed my passion. And I still think like I've done some mentoring of young people over the last few years. And I still would say, if you're not sure what to do, follow your passion. And because things change. And I think that I changed, and I realized that probably my course wasn't right for me by the time I got, to the end of it. But it was fine. I loved university, and it opened up so many doors for me. When I came back, I went traveling after university and came back, moved to London, and got a job in a design company for 6 months and then quit. That wasn't a success story, but I always think that as long as you learn from something, then everything is always a success, as cliche as that may sound. And then I was desperately sending my CV out to all these design companies for weeks on end, getting rejection after rejection, and then realized, London's expensive. I was just like literally caning money left, right, and centre. And one day I just went on the march around Clapham Junction, Clapham South, Clapham North, like pounded the pavements and put my CV into every bar and restaurant, and was just about giving up to go home. And for those of you that will, of my age, will remember there was a pub chain in the UK called the Faraday and Firkin Group, and they had just been bought out and being developed into the Oneills Irish bar chain. And there was a flagship site in Clapham Junction that in London that was being converted. And I knocked on the door, they were due to open, and the assistant manager came in and and said, do you want to come in and have an interview? The interview lasted about 10 minutes. She was like, when can you start? So I started the next day, did the training just as a member of staff. 5 weeks later, I was a supervisor. 3 months later, I was assistant manager, and a year later, I was managing that bar. So I had a, fast track through to management, and I still think like running a bar or running a restaurant is like no experience that you'll ever get on any course anywhere. Like you learn so much so fast. You're dealing with stock and cash and people, customers and staff, and all those temptations in front of you, freebies and booze, and and it was crazy. And I was only 23, and I think I soon realized after, I don't know, a couple of years there, that I didn't want to be pigeonholed. There was a lot of people that were Oneills were going sort of, well, I'll just go to a bigger pub where they're taking more money, and I'll just go up through the chain. And I knew that I just didn't want to be pigeonholed as a bar manager. So I went through to some recruitment companies, and recruitment company put me forward for a role at Vinopolis, which some in the UK will remember it well. It's a wine tasting and an events company that used to be based in London Bridge. Unfortunately, it's closed down now, and now it's restaurants and bars. But it was a 3.5 acre site with several restaurants and bars, a wine tour, and a really successful event business. And I got the job as head of operations there. And from that management job of just managing, 20 people in a bar, I went to managing over 100 at Vinopolis. So I definitely think, if going back to what you said, Carlton, where did your career start? That was definitely it, I think.
Yeah.
Even though it wasn't conscious.
Well, yeah, we were talking earlier about that moment in your life, when it feels like you get your first, not, I hate to say kind of real job, but it feels quite momentous, and it sort of happens usually sort of mid to late 20s, or kind of, your late early 20s, for want of a better phrase, where you feel like you suddenly have taken a bit of a step up in your career. It's not just a job that you go to every day anymore, and it sort of seems quite momentous. But as you get older, you start to realize those milestones happen naturally. They're not one-offs. You continue to have those milestones through your career. So what was your next kind of big milestone after that, do you think?
I guess learning like that I could do it, like I was confident. I wasn't really winging it anymore, and one thing I would say is, if there's pluses and minuses of obviously working for bigger companies or smaller companies, but because I'd worked for Oneills is owned by Mitchells and Butler, which is a massive group, and behind big groups, as you well know, with the likes of Gateway and Merlin and whatnot, you've got all these processes in place. So it gives you a kind of an understanding of like, there's this form for this, like this needs to be completed for, this requirement. So then when you go to a smaller company, you can take those learnings with you, which is like really key. But I think the thing that I would say about working for a smaller company is that you have the ability to learn so many different things because you are forced to. Whereas when you work for a bigger company, you usually have like a specialism, like you might be a marketing exec, but a smaller company, you're like 5 roles in
yeah. You're the market, and we say about when you run your own company, like you do, Sarah, is that you are your own marketing person and the finance person and the HR person, and you wear many hats kind of day to day.
Yeah, so I definitely think that like Vinopolis allowed me to sort of really get to grips with, I knew what I was doing. And then I got interviewed for tours and museum manager at Chelsea Football Club like 2.5 years later, and I wouldn't have been able to interview for that job and got it 2 years prior to that at all. Vinopolis, although it's a different product, Vinopolis was a tourist attraction albeit a very different one. And obviously Chelsea Football Club is also a tourist attraction with a museum and tours. And I think that those, for all the young people that kind of listen would say, well, they're completely different jobs, but they're not completely different jobs because they're completely transferable skills. The end product is different. You're showing that people around a football ground, whereas the end product for Vinopolis was people were wine tasting and learning about wine. So yeah, I think that one of the key things, if I look back on my career, would be stay flexible, because those skills you can pick up and push to a different sector completely.
Yeah, absolutely agree with you. You need to be flexible in what you learn. Again, as you mentioned, you can use it anywhere at any time, in any kind of form as well. So, no, brilliant. Thank you so much for that. So it kind of leads me to my next question, and that's all about giving some advice, some top tips on how to work in industry. So, what sort of tips would you give our listeners to get into the tourist attractions industry?
I think probably going back to a girl called Olivia, who I was mentoring a few years ago. She was always saying to me, everyone else seems to have it worked out. Like, my friend wants to be a lawyer. My friend wants to do this. I don't know what I want to do. And I always used to say to her, like, the worst thing you can do is get frozen, like, and just go, I don't know what to do. Just step forward. Just try anything. Like, go in there and do something for a year, and then if you don't like it, go and work in the retail department instead and try that, because you only end up opening more doors if you walk forwards and try something. Whereas if you get paralyzed by fear of choice, then you don't learn anything. So that would be my one key thing is, walk forward, ask people, find out, go to fairs, go to tourist attractions and ask the people that work there, how did you get this job? What do you have to do? And really think about what you love. And I think that's quite hard when you're young, because you're like, you don't really understand the jobs market, so you don't really understand what's available. But if you love being by yourself in your own company, then perhaps front desk, a visitor attraction isn't going to be your thing. Yeah. But if you're a real people person, then anything sort of frontline that you're going to be interacting with the general public is going to be much more, suited to your skill set. And then you start learning what, other things as time goes on, what you like and what you dislike and what jobs are out there that suit you. But I think that's a starting point. Really hone in on what makes you happy is the key thing.
Yeah, and I think you're right in terms of your example of, I have a friend who knows they want to be a lawyer, and we get a lot of that at school of, are you going to be a fire person or a post delivery, or there's a lot of, kind of archetypal jobs that you sort of get doled out, you're going to be one of these or you're going to do that. And actually, like you say, the jobs market is actually massively more varied than that, and way more intricate and interesting, and things are much more transferable. You don't have to choose to become a lawyer and go and do that for the rest of your life. And I think that not being afraid to try something, and, even if it's not your ideal job, if it entertains you for a few months while you figure something else out, then that's okay too. Like, it's not... Yeah. Doesn't need to be your whole career.
And I think it's really interesting when you've worked with teams that, like, as a consultant, for example, like Carly, when you meet people and there's a diverse group in a project team, when they've come from different industries, it makes for a much more interesting dialogue. Whereas when somebody's just sort of stayed within the same, fold almost for most of their career, sometimes you can get a bit staid. So actually a mixture and sidestepping to a different sector, but using the same skill set is great, I think.
Do you spend hours creating your rotas and then spend days constantly adjusting them? We have the solution. At Staff Savvy, we specialise in shift schedules and timesheet solutions for visitor attractions. Easily manage multiple complex teams of permanent, casual, freelance and volunteer staff across different locations and disciplines. With fast communication features, automatic compliance tools, training management, and simple timesheet tools, Staff Savvy has been used and trusted by organisations such as V&A Dundee, the South Bank Centre, and the Royal Albert Hall, with great cost-saving benefits. Visit us at staffsavvy.com/brown sign project to learn more and schedule a demo of our magic rota button.
You're listening to the Brown Sign Project podcast.
You mentioned earlier, like you'd worked with some recruitment consultants, and I found that really interesting. I'd be interested to hear more about that in terms of how do you find jobs? How did you find jobs? Because I will say I've fallen into all of my jobs as I've gone through life. You know, I've gone from thinking, oh, that might be quite interesting, and I'll do that for a bit, and then found something I was really passionate about along the way. But when you were looking with a recruitment consultant, like how did that work for you? What difference did that make?
Well, I think from memory, because it's a very long time ago, I found a company called Barrett Clark. I don't even know if they exist anymore. And they used to sort of deal specifically with the leisure industry. So whether it would be gyms or attractions or tourist attractions or whatever it was leisure related. And I had a really great contact there. Ironically, I'm still connected to him now. And probably up until about, 6 years ago, he still used to check in on me and sort of say, like, once every 15 months, are you happy? What's the deal? Are you looking for anything? Not in a pushy kind of way, just in a really great relationship. And I think, I don't know how what recruitment companies are like now, but, I think that relationship and somebody actually understanding you and what your focus is key if you're unsure where you should go. So I would say if you're starting out in your early 20s and you're not sure, just make some appointments with some recruitment companies. And actually, even if you go for job interviews, like I'm still not a massive fan of any kind of interview environment, but there's value in going through that process because you learn, and sometimes you even learn. We won't say names, Carly, but I'm sure you'll recognise what I'm talking about. That perhaps you went through the process and you wouldn't have taken that job anyway, but actually that's just as valuable.
I think this is something that gets easier as you get older, potentially. And I think probably the first time I realised that this was the way it worked was really kind of eye-opening for me. Was this job interview isn't about whether they like me, it's about whether I'm the good fit for the job, and it's also about whether they're a good fit for me as an employee. Like, you don't go to a job interview and just think, God, please give me this job, under any circumstances. If there's things in that job interview that you think, maybe this is, a bit of a red flag that I don't really want to work here, or you get vibes that, actually this isn't a company I want to be involved in, you don't have to take it. Just because someone offers you a job doesn't mean you have to take it. And also, that trust your instincts on those ones. Sometimes, it might seem like your dream job, but it's actually, very, very far away from what you want in reality.
100%. And I think that if you're an employer, I can't stress this enough, like it should be just as much about you selling your company to that person. Like, it's not a case of here's a job description and these are the things I'm going to tell you what you should be doing. It's like, well, what are you going to give to the employee? Like, especially in this sector, we're so struggling at the moment, aren't we, with recruitment. Everyone's got massive vacancy lists, and it's like, well, sell the job to those people. What are you going to give to that person? Because there's so many other companies out there that are going to pay better or less, unsociable hours, etc. So it works both ways. You want to be selling yourself to that company when you go for a job interview, and vice versa. I don't think I've ever been in a job as much as Chelsea as we used to get applicants for that role. Oh my God, every job that we used to put out, we used to receive hundreds, literally hundreds. And I used to have to be so ruthless with my, you see the CV, you print them all out, and then you're like, yes, no, yes, no, yes, no, because like there's piles of CVs, and that I would say that's one thing, Carlton, like people that are doing CVs, I have seen some messy CVs in my time, spelling mistakes, bad grammar, and there's no kind of like real excuses. And I know that sounds proper old school, but when you're up against, that person doesn't know you, the person that's interviewing, they're just looking black and white. And actually, if you haven't taken the time to look at how that you're being presented on a piece of paper, that what does that say about what you're going to be like when you're going to be employed by them?
Absolutely. I mean, even like I know employers now are being so ruthless because the job market is so saturated. They're just looking at job description and looking at CVs and they're comparing it to see if it's similar. If it's not, you are just being kicked to the side because applicants are not changing their CVs to meet that job's requirement. They're kind of, we'll just blanket it. I'll just send my same CV to everybody and hope for the best. But no, that's actually delaying the process on the recruiter side because you haven't spent that time to kind of tailor it. On the next level of that as well is if you do tailor it, you're going to shine.
Yeah.
Absolutely shine from the piles of CVs that you do. So yeah, totally agree on that. The CV is important, but it just needs to be tailored.
It's kind of a weird place to be, really, I think, when you're starting out, because one of the things that I thought about when I was coming to this podcast is like challenging the norm, like being different. I think it's really, really important. But then sometimes if you're too different, you haven't thought about the key competencies that you need for that job. You do need to cover all those bases, but then with a spark of your own, to bring something new to that interview.
Yeah, and we had this, we have this conversation quite a lot. I'm really passionate about kind of bringing your whole self to work. And there's a time and a place for fitting in, and there's a time and a place for being unusual and standing out and doing something really different. And I think it's being able to understand when those are appropriate, and also when standing out, if you haven't met the basics, is actually really not very helpful. Like you say, I want to know that you have these transferable skills and that you can do this job kind of standing on your head before you get fancy with it. I want to see the fancy stuff too, but I do kind of need to check some boxes first and know, when you can really kind of push the boundaries of what's acceptable.
And I think that's where like the challenging thing around, the pandemics happened, because I've spoken to a lot of people that work in colleges. They feel like their year groups are way behind. And I don't mean just like education wise, but socially, because obviously people were just locked in their rooms for so long. And I know that years ago, it was really easy to get jobs when you're 14 and 15. And now it's like near on impossible. You can't employ people that young. But those kind of things, your first jobs, are like totally, groundbreaking in terms of how they mold you and stuff. And because there's a whole generation now that have had to delay that for like 18 months, they haven't, gone out into the jobs market or haven't socialized themselves into, they probably only got friends that are their age, which is like key, isn't it? The first time you go and work in a workplace, suddenly you're dealing with people that are like twice your age and younger than you, all sorts. And I think that's a really key learning for as an employee.
Yeah, I think we talk about, the advancements in remote working. And I think I'm a huge, massive will bang the drum for remote working, because I think it can massively revolutionize our industry and bring talent to where maybe, doesn't need such a geographical location. But I do think those initial jobs when you're starting your career, you do sort of need to sit in an office with, Marjorie, who does the accounts, and Steve, who got 12 kids and wants to tell you about them all. You sort of need those older people's experiences to kind of guide you and to mold you a little bit. And I think you lose a lot if you're just at home, behind a screen, not kind of getting that one-on-one experience. And I think a lot of people put off those jobs that are more in person, because they see them somehow as like lower jobs, they're lower on the rankings. So I come out of university and I maybe don't want to go and have worked in McDonald's for 6 months, but actually sometimes those are the jobs that absolutely make you who you are and make you really kind of understand what working is like, because your job can be very different to working in McDonald's and serving people, but the skills aren't. The skills are still skills.
And I also think, like, if you do go into management, you get a lot more then credibility for the fact that you've been the frontline staff, or you've been a cleaner, or you've done the hard graft. There's not this manager saying, oh, I think you should do it this way, with teams going, well, what do you know? Well, I do know, because I have been there, and I've dealt with all the annoying customers that have just given you a load of grief at the end of the day when you're really tired, or a drunk person that's like, refusing to get out of your bar. And it's really invaluable to do the starting jobs, that aren't so great pay. But I had just as great a time when I was paid 11 grand as I did when I was paid 50 grand. So, it makes things easier, money, but that it doesn't necessarily give you a better time,
I think there's a lot to be said for, as your earnings grow, you just grow into them. I think there's a lot of things of, what you can live on at 18 is very different to what you can live on at 45. But I do think there's a lot to be said for, not worrying too much, as long as you can pay your bills initially about, is that a really great earning job for me? It's like, well, think about more about what experience you might get from it, or where it might lead you to, or, you don't need to be sort of, unless you can't afford to live your life, then worry less about, whether the money is important or not to you.
I mean, something that's really important that I've kind of spoken to people about, or people speak to me, is kind of like, I finished university, I want to go straight into management. And I'm like, that's great. And I love the power and the enthusiasm for it. But you need to start at the bottom and work your way up. The reason is because a lot of the managers have done the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
They've started from the bottom and worked their way up. So you can't just jump into management in a tourist attraction expecting to manage people when you have no idea how it feels to be in that person's shoes. As I mentioned, I mentioned a couple of podcasts before. I started as a cleaner. I have big respects for cleaners in attractions because I've been there. I've had to clean crap off toilet seats and pee all over the place. So I understand what they have to go through. So when I do have a team like that, I have more empathy if they kind of don't want to do it or feel uncomfortable than if somebody came straight from uni and go, yeah, I'm going to be a manager, and not understand that concept. So thank you very much for sharing that.
If you don't like cleaning toilets, I would avoid you being a bar manager, because unfortunately that's your job when you're a manager as well as anything else. Big yellow glove that goes all the way up to your shoulder. When the toilets are like blocked on a Saturday night at 11 o'clock, no, you're not going to ask anyone else to do it. That gets paid minimum wage issue that's going to do it. So
well, that fits very well to my next question. I'm going to ask you is, what would you tell your 18-year-old self about getting into the industry? So what sort of skills do you think you would love to get?
I would say yes to a lot of things, even if your fear tells you, oh, I don't think I can do that, or I don't have the skills to do it, or X person probably do it better. Say yes, put yourself forward for things and push through the fear, because I love loads of self-help books. I'm a trained coach, and I think that if you can push through boundaries of fear, then it just breeds more confidence in you, and like gradually then that fear becomes nothing. So that would be my first thing to my younger self. Don't be afraid to try new things. And I guess the second one would be don't compare. Like, don't compare to your friends that are doing X. Like when I was in Oneills running around like a headless chicken on Friday and Saturday nights, most of my friends had Monday to Friday jobs. They were all out having a great time on Friday and Saturday nights while I was working my backside off. But you know what? I had such a great time in that job. And, you know, I saved a load of money as well, which, you know, they didn't have. And actually it was my fast track, even though it wasn't like a management training program or anything. It was my fast track. So it swings and roundabouts, and I wouldn't change anything about the last 30 years at all. So yeah, I would definitely say pushing through the fear, saying yes to lots of things, asking for help. Don't be afraid to say that you don't know something. It's one of my pet hates when people say, yeah, I know. And then you go, do you? And then it turns out they don't know.
Oh, don't get me started on that, please. Absolutely. It's just so important. If you don't know how to do it, just say you don't know. It's not going to affect your career. You're not going to get fired, you know. And I think a lot of people have that fear of like, oh, you know, I don't want to look like I don't know, weak, or because I just don't know this thing. Just ask for help, you know. That's it. It's just very, very simple.
I think we've probably talked about this on the podcast before, but I used to do induction training at a historical house. And I will tell you now, there is one thing you need to know about me, and it is I know nothing about history. And I'm really good at social history, but dates, no idea. Barely know when my own birthday is. Certainly can't remember dates about history. And, you know, that would be a thing that people were genuinely scared about. They'd be like, you know, someone's going to come in, they're going to ask me about this specific point in history, and I'm not going to know, you know, and try and think, oh, I have to read all these books or whatever, and I'm only going to work in the cafe, you know, might not know all of this. And so I used to say to them, you know, actually the best advice you can have is tell them you don't know, but then tell them something you do know. So if you have a guest who asks you a really specific question, you can say to them, oh, do you know what? I actually don't know that. It's kind of embarrassing. You know, do whatever you need to do, sort of make yourself feel better about it. And say, I can find out for you. But here's also something really cool that I do know that's kind of linked to it. And I tell you, I got through 3 years of working in a historical house with that, of just, you know, remember the tidbits, remember the things that are really useful to you, but be kind of genuine about it. And I think that the earlier you can start that in your career, the easier you find it then as you get later along. Yeah. You can always find the answer, but if you panic in the starting, you're actually going to make things worse. So you're better off just admitting it straight up.
Yeah. I think there's always somebody, isn't there, that whether it's your specific sector or your specific company that you're working for, that will help you. And, you know, like I don't think I've ever felt quite so like that as I have done in the last year since launching ReWork. Like literally so many people like will help me, you know, they're not getting paid to help me, but well, some of them are, but you know, most of them are not getting paid to help me, and yet, you know, they'd walk over hot coals to do, you know, to put themselves out, which I think is like, if you can put that out and you help other people, then it will come back 360 around to you, whether it happens straight away. But yeah, helping other people.
Yeah, exactly. And we talked kind of about the past and all the courses that's gone on and what you talk to yourself. How do you see the job that you do now changing in the future? And obviously you work in tech, so that's a potential thing. Is that, do you see the job that you do now changing, or jobs that you've done in the past changing, whether that's through technology or, you know, market changes, or sort of what do you see in your crystal ball for you?
Well, I think there'll always be a role for consultants, because I think that there's a time gap, as in people don't have time for things. They're running their own business, and they need somebody to, you know, to speed up that time. Also, if you're working, whether it be in a visitor attraction or somewhere else, you're not an expert in everything. Like, you can't be an expert in everything. So there's always going to be a place for somebody as an expert to come in and fill those knowledge gaps for you. You know, how the role changes, you know, it's difficult, isn't it? Because technology I know everyone always says, oh, it's moving so fast. But I remember an old partner of mine used to say to me, technology's always moved fast. You know, you just look at it in a very different way, you know, from the light bulb to the car wheel to, you know, it's just a different type of technology. Things have always been fast paced. And I think that the industry probably will change more than consultants. You know, the role of where does the staff member, where do they add most value? You know, we've already seen it, haven't we? You know, through the pandemic and the shift of kiosks again, and you know that they were popular back however many 10 years ago, and then people want to use them again. But I think that technology should always be there to support us. Sometimes when it's the worst possible version of technology is there, it's just there for the sake of it, it's not adding any value. And it's I guess it's our job as consultants to make sure that you're pointing to the best case of technology for those clients, you know, using their money wisely to add some value to their business.
Yeah, I think you're right. There's always a gimmick, isn't there? And I think, like you said about technology moving fast, it's not moving faster. We're just getting older, and so you get further away from the things that you remember as a kid they just were there. You know, so we talk about, you know, we didn't have laptops when writing dissertations, but we wouldn't have thought anything about the VHS player or the record player in our house or the tape cassettes or whatever, because we were born with them, and so it seemed kind of natural. You grew up with them. But I do think you're right about there's always a gimmick. There's always it's a big new thing, it's a big new invention, and whether that's kiosks or apps or whatever it is, I think there's always a leaning towards maybe throwing your money at it when really what you need is a human being and some understanding what you're trying to achieve.
What's really interesting is the rise of AI as well, and how that's going to change our industry, especially behind the scenes. So kind of in marketing and finance, using AI to kind of number crunch and analyze information, which is going to be really great. But I don't know how yet that's going to affect our front of house staff or our managers, how AI is going to play a role in that.
Yeah, well, see, at the moment, it's not that far advanced that you can just plug it in and leave it alone. Because if you think about like AI for like copywriting, for example, it's very clear if you use any of those tools that it's been you're using an AI copywriter. You know, the lack of personal human skills gone into that copywriting is very evident. So you still need somebody to go in there and then add that human element to it. How that changes in the future, it totally scares me to think that there's AI artists out there now, as in like somebody that can replicate a painting in the style of Dali, for example, and then they can sell that piece of work. Because I'm like, to me, that's a craft. So I think that some things will go back 360, a bit like farming, hopefully, where people start thinking about where they buy their food and the artisan type of element, that will be more valuable to them to buy off somebody that is a maker, an artist, a maker, and then the other stuff will just be the mass produced.
Yeah, and I think we're sort of in that market generally anyway. And I think to bring that to kind of attractions, I think, and write in, by all means, email us with your complaints about what I'm about to say. Because I think we went through a bit of a period with escape rooms that was a bit like that. And maybe also kind of the trampoline park. There was a bit of a boom. People sort of started kind of putting them up quite quickly. That boom was over, and there was then suddenly lots of places sat empty. But I think the difference between those things that can be replicated quite quickly, that have, low overheads and but high cost, and people are turning just for a profit, versus something that, you go to a little museum that's owned by the person that's made the collection, and that real personal experience, I think, is a very vast scale.
Yeah.
But I think you're right. I think we search out those real experiences.
Yeah.
We, especially with leisure time, it's a big thing.
They almost kind of like, they add value, but they don't replace. Because if you look at like, the artists, immersive galleries, for example, like Frameless, it's open in central London, they're not replacing Van Gogh's paintings. Like, come on, like, I never forget the day that I went to the first time to the National Gallery and was like blown away at 16 at how big the paintings were compared to the pictures in the book, and how depth the color, and looking at how thick the paint was and everything. You don't get any of that from an immersive gallery, but you're giving the opportunity for people to see that probably wouldn't ever be able to go to wherever the sunflowers are now. And it allows art to be more accessible, which is the point, isn't it, of the cultural sector. Why all museums in the UK were made free back however many years ago now, to make it more accessible. So it does add value. I just don't think necessarily technology replaces.
Yeah, we're still looking for an experience at the heart of it, and I don't think in most cases you can replace human experience with an AI experience.
Yeah,
tech experience, definitely.
I think a really good example of that was the London 2012 Olympics. And again, write in if you want to complain about what I'm just about to say. But when there was like loads of people were complaining about the ticket staff in the tube stations stuff having to stand out front and not be out the back. But I was like, well, what is that's the craziest complaint ever. Like, it was amazing how that they were out the front greeting everyone, helping like the international visitors use the machines, and it was the best time. I loved living in London in 2012. And so therefore technology is not replacing, if you look at that in a visitor attractions sense, get the staff out there, get them greeting and interacting, but they don't necessarily need to be behind a till selling the ticket anymore. Absolutely.
Excellent. Thank you so much for that. And I'm so sorry, we've actually come to the end of our podcast. So thank you so much for your insights and all the information you shared. I know our listeners are going to take that away and use it and be better in what they do. So thank you so much.
No problem.
So actually, I did lie. I've got one more question to ask you. Is where can we find you on the digital space?
So my website is reworkconsulting.co.uk, and I'm on LinkedIn as well, my own personal page and company page.
When they want to complain about your comments about the Olympics, that's
right in. Excellent. So that's your invitation to everybody who's listening to write in if you have a complaint. On two comments on this show. Brilliant. Thank you so much for taking the time and sharing your knowledge and experience with us. That's it for us for this podcast. Have a fantastic day.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for tuning into the Brown Sign Project. In our next episode, we have a conversation with Ted Yates. He's an award-winning hotelier and an expert in creating great customer experience.
Thanks, as always, to our series sponsors, Staff Savvy and Retail Integration. The Brown Sign Project was edited by Paul Tyler, and don't forget you can follow us on Twitter @BrownSignPod, or you can find us on LinkedIn.